Miss Georgiana Shipman was a plump lady in a tight dress. She was short, dark, with a double chin and eyes that almost always smiled. She did not have a single beautiful feature, yet her smile, friendly, understanding of one's mistakes as well as one's successes, hid many of her flaws. Girls loved Miss Georgiana almost right away. Even the boldest and most naughty boys felt bad and did not want to cause trouble for Miss Georgiana. Sometimes boys with a long history of bad behavior in other grades, bad behavior that filled other teachers' discipline books, somehow made it to Miss Georgiana's room without being kicked out of school by the principal. Once they entered her room, they seemed to change magically. Mr. Marks knew that if he could get the most badly behaved boys to spend a year with Miss Georgiana Shipman, most of these hard-to-manage boys would be saved to the school. Sometimes they graduated at the very top of their classes. It was as if Miss Georgiana were a fairy godmother who waved her wand and said, "Say sesame. Change." The naughty boys often came through Miss Georgiana's hands and went to high school with a good reputation after all. Miss Georgiana was not a softie, far from it. Ask the boys themselves about it. They would just hang their heads and shuffle their feet on the rug and say, "Ah, Miss Shipman understands a guy." Her influence over the girls was even greater. She expected you to learn your lessons, and if you were lazy, she worked very hard to make you try. And if you did not work, Miss Georgiana felt hurt, and that made any nice girl feel very bad. Besides, you took up more of the teacher's time than you should, and the other girls thought it was not fair and talked pretty harshly about you. If Miss Georgiana had to stay after school for any reason, more than half of her girls would wait around the school entrance until she came out, and then they all walked home with her. When you saw a group of girls from 12 to 14 years old, or so, gathered on one of the shady walks of the parade soon after school closed for the day, or chatting along Whipple Street where Miss Georgiana Shipman lived, you could be sure that the sixth-grade teacher was in the center of the group. Miss Georgiana lived with her mother, a little old lady in simple clothes, in a small house set back from the street. 3 big trees grew in the front yard, and the grass under them was always worn down by the girls who liked to sit there. In nice weather, girls often gathered under these trees. Being invited to Miss Georgiana's for tea was every girl's dream from number 6. Even after graduating, girls didn't forget Miss Georgiana easily. They trusted her and went to her with problems they couldn't tell anyone else. Girls without understanding mothers found in Miss Georgiana a special person who filled the role of a parent. Miss Georgiana had been teaching for 20 years, but she never seemed to get old. Her influence spread far, like ripples in a pond, touching many lives in Milton. Agnes Kenway couldn't help but adore Miss Georgiana. Miss Georgiana quickly realized that Agnes was someone who often found herself in trouble but managed to get out of it without serious harm. Trix Severn bothered Agnes. Trix would whisper irrelevant things to Agnes during class, but Miss Georgiana and most of the girls didn't hear. It irritated Agnes, and one afternoon, She burst out at Trix during her recitation, saying she'd go mad if Trix didn't stop interrupting her. Miss Georgiana was surprised and asked Agnes what was going on. Agnes didn't care and said Trix was interrupting her. Trix didn't, said Trix, which showed that she wasn't being truthful in that case. I didn't talk to her, Trix insisted. You did. Agnes argued. Agnes, sit down, Miss Shipman said firmly, as the whole class was disturbed. What were you doing, Beatrice? Just studying, Miss Shipman, Trix said innocently. This is not the time for studying, but for recitation. You don't need to recite now, and I'll talk to both of you after school. Luella, please continue where Agnes left off, Miss Shipman instructed. I'll get back at you for this, Trix whispered angrily to Agnes. Agnes felt too upset to respond, and Trix, feeling jealous, added, You corner house girls think you can control everything in this school, but you'll see, miss. You're just newcomers. When Miss Georgiana investigated the incident after school, Agnes didn't feel like repeating what Trix had said. She didn't want to be a tattletale. So, she just repeated her earlier complaint that Trix's whispering had confused her during her recitation. I never whispered to her, Trix snapped, tossing her head. I'm not that fond of her, I hope. I expect all my girls to be fond of each other, Miss Georgiana said with a smile, to be very caring and not to hurt each other's feelings, or even to bother each other. She's just pretending, Trix sniffed. Agnes is nervous, the teacher said calmly, but she needs to learn to control her nerves and not to get angry and behave in an unladylike manner. Beatrice, you must not whisper and bother your classmates. I hope you two girls won't be involved in such an incident again while you're with me. I'm sorry, Miss Shipman, Agnes said. But when the teacher turned away, Trix made an ugly face and stuck out her tongue at Agnes. She was boiling with spite. This incident happened on the first day Agnes was late getting home, so she missed the beginning of another important event. All 4 of the kittens were now big cats, but they were still young and playful. Sometimes, the girls laughed a lot because of the funny things Sandy-Face 4 children did. There were going to be 2 ducks for Sunday's dinner, and Uncle Rufus had carefully plucked them into a box in a corner of the kitchen, so the feathers wouldn't make a mess. Mrs. McCall liked to save duck and goose feathers to use for pillows. When the oldest and the 2 youngest Kenway girls walked into the kitchen, Popocatepetl was chasing a feather around the floor. In her excitement, she accidentally knocked over the shovel, tongs, and poker that were standing by the fireplace. The noise scared Petal a lot. Her tail got really big and her fur stood up on her back. She ran across the kitchen and into the pantry. Uncle Rufus had just taken the box of feathers into the pantry and put it on the floor, thinking it was out of the way. Meanwhile, Mrs. McCall was measuring molasses at the table to make a gingerbread cake for supper. Shoo, you cat, Uncle Rufus said. There are too many cats in this house, and not enough mice to catch. Oh, Uncle Rufus, do you really mean that? asked Tess. Aren't there at least 5 mice left? You said there were hundreds before Sandy Face and her kittens came. Well, I guess there aren't many left now, Uncle Rufus agreed. Hey, what's that cat doing now? Go away, Mrs. McCall shouted. She had left the table for a moment, and Popocatépetl was on it. Petal! Ruth yelled and ran to grab her pet. All 3 scolding her and chasing her made Petal very upset. She arched her back, spat angrily, and then jumped off the table. In her rush, she knocked over a cup of molasses, which broke on the floor and made a big sticky mess. That kitten! Mrs. McCall screamed. Wait, wait! Ruth pleaded, trying to catch Petal. But the cat slipped past her and ran right through the molasses on the floor. All her paws were covered in sticky goo. Everywhere she stepped, she left a mark. And just when Ruth tried to grab her again, Petal jumped into the box of feathers. Now completely covered in feathers and molasses, Petal panicked. She leaped out of the box, scattering sticky feathers everywhere. She raced around the kitchen in a frenzy, trying to find a way out, faster than any kitten had ever moved in that room before. Stop her! Ruth screamed. My clean kitchen! Mrs. McCall cried. Look at those feathers! Look at those feathers! Uncle Rufus exclaimed. She's got them all stuck to her, for sure. Oh no! Tess and Dot cried, holding on to each other as Petal dashed past them. Just then, Agnes opened the door and saw what looked like a feather-covered blur racing around the kitchen, with everyone chasing after it. What in the world is happening? Agnes gasped. Petal saw the open door and dashed through it as fast as lightning, leaving a trail of feathers and sticky spots all over the kitchen floor.